They say you're too quiet, too intense, too much. You speak, and suddenly the room falls silent. Not because you're wrong, but because you're different. Your words don't fit into the script everyone else is following. You say things they haven't even dared to think. You feel things they've spent years trying to numb. And after a while, something strange happens. The invitations stop. The conversations get shorter. You start noticing the subtle distance in people's eyes. They laugh easily at things that bore you. They obsess over gossip, drama, and trends while your mind lingers on meaning, mortality, and the mechanics of human nature. So you adapt. You smile when you're supposed to. You nod at the right time. But deep down, you feel like a stranger among your own kind, like you're living in a parallel world nobody else can see. And eventually, you start to wonder, is something wrong with me? But what if it's not you? What if the very thing that makes you feel out of place is actually a sign that you're fully awake in a world sleepwalking through its own illusion? What if your silence, your sensitivity, your questions aren't a weakness to fix, but evidence of something rare, something powerful, a mind that was never built for the shallow, the fake, the herd? This video will explore that brutal possibility, why your loneliness might not be a symptom, but a sign. The silent curse of intelligence. Childhood to adulthood. It begins when you're young. You're sitting in a classroom filled with noise, laughter, pencil tapping, voices bouncing from wall to wall. Everyone else seems to belong. They move together, talk the same, joke in ways that feel oddly empty to you. You're the same age, sitting at the same desk, reading from the same textbook, and yet you feel like you're living on a different wavelength. You're not superior. You don't think you're better. You just see differently. While others lose themselves in play, you're watching how your teacher's face tenses when she says she's fine, how your friend's smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. You hear the silence behind people's words. You feel things before they're said. And it's confusing because no one else seems to notice. No one else seems to care. You start asking questions, not to be difficult, but because you genuinely want to understand. Why do people lie when they don't need to? Why does everyone say, "I'm good," when they're clearly not? Why does small talk feel like a rehearsed play nobody enjoys? You're not trying to start a rebellion, you're just aware. And awareness, even at that age, is isolating. So slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to hide parts of yourself. You laugh when everyone else laughs, even if you don't get the joke. You nod when you're confused. You stop asking why, not because you found the answers, but because you realized no one wants to hear the questions. You don't speak your thoughts, because every time you do, the room shifts, the air tightens, eyes glance sideways, and you learn something painful. Honesty makes people uncomfortable. Depth disrupts the vibe. Insight is a kind of social risk, so you learn to perform. You wear the mask. You blend in. Not because you want to, but because you have to. Because every time you revealed your inner world, it only made you feel more alien. And that's the silent curse of intelligence. Not the kind that earns gold stars or test scores, but the kind that notices what others ignore and feels what others avoid. The paradox of society's worship of intelligence. We live in a world that claims to worship intelligence. We hand out awards, build statues of genius, flood social media with inspirational quotes from Einstein and Tesla and Hawking. We say we admire the thinkers, the visionaries, the minds that change the world. But that admiration is often a disguise, because when you meet someone truly intelligent in real life, someone who sees through illusions, someone who speaks uncomfortable truths, the reaction isn't applause, it's silence, or worse, rejection. Here's the paradox. Society praises intelligence in theory, but emotionally rejects it in practice. Why? Because real intelligence doesn't flatter the group, it confronts it. It doesn't smooth over contradictions, it exposes them. And it doesn't play along just to fit in, it questions the very game. You've probably seen this happen. In a group conversation, you share an honest observation, something raw and real. Instead of engagement, you get nervous laughter, a subject change, people shifting in their seats. It's not that you're wrong, it's that you disrupted the comfort. You touched something too real, too deep, and most people didn't come for that. Real intelligence does not just solve problems, it asks why those problems exist in the first place. It doesn't just innovate, it interrogates. It looks beneath the surface, behind the mask, beyond the script. And in a culture addicted to convenience and consensus, that kind of clarity feels dangerous. This is why intelligent people often feel emotionally exiled. Not because they're unpleasant, but because their presence makes others feel exposed. Most people don't want truth, they want reassurance. They want echo chambers. And intelligence, real intelligence, shatters the echo. So, while society parades its love for brilliant minds, it prefers them quiet, controlled, softened. We want intelligence without disruption, insight without discomfort. We want the ideas without the individual who brings them. And when a person refuses to shrink, when they speak honestly, even when it stings, they are often pushed to the margins, not because they failed, but because they didn't play the game. This is the tragic irony. The same society that quotes genius on Instagram fears it when it walks into the room. Schopenhauer's brutal truth: the noble mind will be alone, Arthur. Schopenhauer didn't sugarcoat anything. He wasn't interested in optimism for its own sake. He believed the world was full of illusions, and that intelligence was not a blessing, but a burden few could carry without breaking. While others chased happiness, he studied suffering. And what he discovered was both brutal and liberating. The truly intelligent mind will almost always walk alone. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." It sounds harsh, even bleak. But if you've ever felt like your mind is a world no one else understands, you know exactly what he meant. Schopenhauer saw what most philosophers refuse to admit, that the deeper your awareness, the more alienated you become from those who live only on the surface. That the more clearly you see the world, the less of it you can stomach. That the closer you get to truth, the farther you drift from the crowd. He believed that people aren't driven by reason. They're driven by will, a blind and irrational force that compels them to chase pleasure, status, and comfort without even questioning why. Most people, he said, are sleepwalking, acting out desires they don't understand in a world they don't want to look too closely at. But the intelligent, the thinkers, the questioners, they don't chase blindly. They stop. They observe. They ask uncomfortable questions. And that pause, that awareness, is what separates them. It's also what isolates them, because once you see the emptiness behind the noise, the games people play, the lies they tell to survive, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending. You can't fake laughter at a joke that doesn't land in your soul. You can't sit through small talk when your mind is stuck on questions like, what does it all mean? Why are we really here? To Schopenhauer, this wasn't cynicism. It was clarity. It was reality. And those who could face it without blinking, those rare, noble minds, would never fully belong in a world built for distraction. That's the truth no one tells you. The smarter you are, the lonelier it gets. Not because you're flawed, but because you're awake. The psychological trap: intelligence versus belonging. Here's the cruelest part of all this. Intelligent people aren't machines. They don't just crave truth, they crave connection. They want to be understood, not just admired from a distance, or called smart, like a label on a trophy, but truly seen, heard, felt. Yet the deeper your intelligence, the more difficult that becomes. It's not because you're antisocial, it's because your thoughts don't fit into small spaces. You feel too much, see too much. And that makes everyday conversation feel like watching a shallow stream when you're thirsty for an ocean. Most people talk to fill silence. You speak to find meaning. And that difference creates a kind of psychological trap where the smarter you are, the harder it is to feel satisfied in social settings. Modern psychology confirms what Schopenhauer suspected centuries ago. A 2016 study published in the British Journal of Psychology revealed something shocking. Highly intelligent people often feel less happy the more they socialize. Unlike most, who gain energy and fulfillment from frequent interaction, deep thinkers often walk away from crowds feeling overstimulated, disconnected, or even emotionally drained. Why? Because they crave depth. They want real conversation, not gossip, not forced positivity, not the mental ping-pong of daily drama. They want to talk about existence, purpose, pain, wonder. But the world rarely offers those conversations, so they learn to shrink themselves, to sit quietly, to nod along. This is cognitive loneliness, being surrounded by people, yet feeling profoundly alone. It's not the absence of company, but the absence of resonance. You might have 50 people in your life and still feel like no one truly gets you, and that's a wound that never fully heals. You still long for someone who doesn't just listen, but understands. Someone who doesn't think you're too much, but sees your intensity as beautiful. Someone who doesn't get intimidated by your mind, but feels invited into it. But most people don't speak that language, so you build walls, emotional armor. You become cautious, not cold, but careful. You've been misunderstood too many times, so you smile but don't open up. You connect but don't reveal. And behind every casual, "I'm fine," there's a truth you've learned to bury. This is the paradox. Intelligent people need connection just like anyone else, but the very nature of their mind makes it harder to find. The envy effect. How? Ego turns against intelligence. You would think that intelligence earns respect, that speaking with insight, clarity, or depth would draw others closer. Sometimes, at first, it does. People admire it. They compliment your brilliance, your wisdom, your ability to articulate what others only feel. But soon, something shifts. The admiration becomes resentment. The praise turns to passive aggression. And without warning, you're labeled difficult, arrogant, too much. It's not because you've changed, it's because their ego has. The harsh truth? Intelligence often acts as a mirror. When you speak clearly, think deeply, or offer a perspective others haven't considered, you unintentionally expose something. Their limits, their blind spots, their emotional fragility, and most people don't want to confront that. They don't want a mirror, they want a mask. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect comes into play, a psychological phenomenon where people with lower ability overestimate their competence because they lack the insight to recognize what they don't know. Now imagine that person sitting across from someone truly intelligent. It's not a fair fight. They feel outshined, exposed, small. But instead of saying, "Wow, I could learn something here," their ego goes into defense mode. Who does this person think they are? Why are they always so serious? Why can't they just chill like the rest of us? And suddenly, it's not your words that are rejected, it's you. You didn't insult anyone. You didn't try to dominate. You simply showed up with your mind intact. And that alone triggered something they didn't want to face. It's happened for centuries. Socrates was sentenced to death, not because he hurt anyone, but because he asked questions that made the powerful feel foolish. Galileo was punished for speaking scientific truth that threatened religious dogma. Alan Turing, a genius who helped end World War II, was destroyed by the very society he saved. This isn't just history, it's a pattern. Even today, if you walk into a room and say something others haven't heard before, something that reveals contradiction or disrupts consensus, you don't get a handshake, you get side eyes. People won't always say it out loud, but they feel it. You're dangerous, not because you're evil, but because you make people think. And thinking threatens comfort. Comfort is sacred. So what happens? You're excluded, whispered about, dismissed not for your flaws, but for your clarity. That's the silent punishment for those who shine too brightly in rooms that worship the dim. But here's the irony. They call you arrogant without realizing that they're projecting. You never said you were better. They just felt worse. Modern rejection. Schools, workplaces, and social media rejection doesn't always look like a door slammed in your face. In the modern world, it's quieter, more subtle, but just as brutal. It's in the classroom, the office, the feed on your phone. It's the quiet message sent to every deep thinker. Don't go too far. Don't dig too deep. Don't think too much. Let's start with school. You raise your hand, not to show off, but because you genuinely want to understand. You ask, why is it like this? The room goes quiet. The teacher shifts uncomfortably. Maybe she answers, maybe she brushes it off. But you notice the looks from other students. Not admiration, annoyance. You're disrupting the script. In most schools, the reward doesn't go to the curious. It goes to the compliant. The student who follows the rules, memorizes the facts, regurgitates what's expected. The student who questions too much? They're labeled difficult, or worse, disruptive. Then you grow up. You land a job. A meeting begins. And once again, you notice what others don't. You see a flaw in the system, an inefficiency, a contradiction. You speak up, not to attack, but to help. But your suggestion doesn't land. It threatens the comfort of those who built the system. Instead of curiosity, you get cold stares. Your boss smiles, but never brings it up again. You learn quickly. Workplaces praise innovation, in theory, but in practice, they reward obedience. They want creativity as long as it doesn't challenge anyone's authority. They want new ideas as long as they don't come from someone too honest. And then there's social media, a place built for free thought, or so we're told. But scroll long enough and you'll notice. The algorithm doesn't reward depth. It rewards simplicity, repetition, outrage, shiny graphics, fast edits, emotional manipulation, not nuance, not reflection, not truth. Post something thoughtful, something that questions the herd or explores a complex truth, and you'll likely get ignored or misunderstood, or worse, buried by the feed entirely. Meanwhile, shallow content spreads like wildfire. Not because it's meaningful, but because it's easy. That's the modern paradox. We live in a society that needs deep thinkers, but systematically rejects them. We say we want honest conversation, thoughtful analysis, disruptive creativity, but only if it doesn't make us uncomfortable. And what happens to those who refuse to fake it? Who won't play dumb? Who won't smile through lies? Who can't pretend small talk is fulfilling? They get filtered out, silenced, not always aggressively, sometimes passively, excluded from group chats, skipped over in meetings, shadow banned in conversations that were never deep enough for them in the first place. It's rejection by 1,000, paper cuts. And the more intelligent you are, the more you see it happening in real time. The power of solitude, Schopenhauer's solution. When the world rejects you for your depth, it hurts. There's no sugarcoating it. You don't just lose connection, you begin to question your own sanity. Why can't I just be normal? Why can't I turn it off? That longing for resonance becomes a dull ache that never quite goes away. But Schopenhauer offered an answer, one that wasn't comforting, but freeing. Solitude is not your enemy. It's your liberation. To him, the world was never designed to accommodate the deeply intelligent. Society rewards sameness, not difference. It values comfort over truth, harmony over honesty. And if your mind disrupts that harmony, you will eventually find yourself on the outside looking in. But that's not a tragedy, it's a signal that you're ready for a deeper kind of existence. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." It wasn't a sentence of exile. It was an invitation to stop performing and start being. He believed that solitude isn't just absence, it's presence. The presence of your thoughts, your creativity, your truth, without interruption. In solitude, no one tells you to dilute yourself. No one rolls their eyes at your curiosity. No one changes the subject when you try to talk about death, beauty, suffering, or truth. In solitude, you don't need to shrink to fit in. You can finally expand. To most people, solitude feels like a void, something to escape. That's why we chase constant distraction, scrolling, noise, dopamine on demand. But for thinkers, solitude is not empty, it's sacred. It's where ideas are born, where perspective is sharpened, where you stop bending to the herd and start listening to your inner compass. Think of the minds that shaped history: Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Da Vinci, Virginia Woolf, Alan Watts. None of them became who they were through groupthink or crowd validation. They retreated, they reflected, they endured the loneliness that comes with clarity, and in that silence, they discovered truth. Schopenhauer didn't romanticize this. He acknowledged the pain, but he also saw the power. In solitude, you don't just protect your mind, you reclaim it. From the noise, from the conditioning, from the pressure to explain yourself to people who are never meant to understand. Because sometimes, to see clearly, you have to stand alone. Final message: you are not broken, you are awake. If you've ever felt like a stranger in every room, if your thoughts echo louder in silence than in conversation, if your need for truth has cost you comfort, connection, and community, then let this be your reminder. You are not broken. You are awake. The world wasn't built for people like you, not because you're flawed, but because your very presence disturbs the illusion. Most people drift through life seeking agreement, distraction, and validation, but you seek meaning. You ask why when others settle for just because. You feel things others suppress. You notice what they miss. You can't turn your mind off, and sometimes that feels like a curse, but it's not. It's your proof. Proof that you were born with a mind that won't sleep through life. Proof that you care enough to question what others accept. And yes, that will make you lonely. Yes, it will make you misunderstood. But don't mistake that discomfort for dysfunction. It's clarity. And clarity has a cost. Schopenhauer knew that. He didn't try to fix the loneliness of the intelligent. He honored it. He understood that the price of deep thought is often emotional exile, but he also believed that exile has a purpose because it frees you from the herd, from pretense, from shallowness. It invites you to build something real within yourself. So let the rejection come. Let the silence fall when you speak truth. Let them call you too intense, too weird, too much. Because every time you feel that sting, it means you're not asleep. You're not one of them. You're not pretending. You're thinking. You're feeling. You're alive. And you're not alone. Not here. Not in this space. There are others like you. Quiet minds. Deep souls. People who have learned to walk through this world with their hearts guarded and their truths buried, but still burning with vision. You're not the only one who wonders, is there anyone else like me? There is, and we see you. So don't water yourself down to fit a room you were never meant to enter. Don't mute your insight just to maintain a peace that was built on pretense. Don't contort yourself for applause from people who fear the truth you carry. Instead, stand tall in your solitude. Protect your fire. And know this: you're not too much. You're just ahead of your time. And maybe, just maybe, that loneliness you feel isn't the absence of people. It's the presence of awakening.